Why do we distinguish the lost cause from, say, other historical romanticization of history, like, say, people viewing knights in such a favorable view today, when in their time many of them were considered tyrants?
The lost cause is distinguished from other romanticized views of history for a few reasons. Firstly, it was a deliberate and coordinated effort to rewrite history to support the ideology of white supremacy and defend the South's actions during the Civil War. This was not simply a case of people looking back on history with rose-colored glasses, but rather a concerted effort to shape public opinion and maintain the racial hierarchy in the aftermath of Reconstruction. Secondly, the lost cause helped to shape the historical narrative of the United States for decades, influencing everything from textbooks to popular culture. This had a lasting impact on how people understood the causes and consequences of the Civil War, and reinforced ideas about the inherent superiority of white people. Finally, the lost cause has been used as a justification for ongoing discrimination against Black Americans and the perpetuation of white supremacist ideology. While other romanticized views of history may be problematic, the lost cause is particularly harmful because of its direct link to systemic racism and oppression.
On the first point, I'm sure kings, lords, and knights did encourage the romanticization of the knights for obvious socio-political reasons. Also, the lost cause was, and is not particularly needed to maintain the racial hierarchy and racism views of America. White supremacy was largely an unchallenged default position of both a majority of Northerners and Southerners. Lincoln, for example, didn't completely end slavery as he allowed it to continue in prisons, and he was still harsh on Native Americans.
You make some good points. It is true that the romanticization of knights and other historical figures can serve political and social purposes, and that the lost cause narrative was not the only means of perpetuating white supremacy in the United States. However, the lost cause narrative was particularly insidious because it not only glorified the Confederacy and the antebellum South, but it also sought to rewrite the history of the Civil War and downplay the role of slavery in the conflict. By emphasizing states' rights and the supposed heroism of Confederate soldiers, the lost cause narrative obscured the fact that the South seceded primarily to protect the institution of slavery and that the Confederate soldiers fought to preserve that system. This distortion of history has had lasting consequences, as it has contributed to a lack of understanding and acknowledgement of the ongoing impact of racism in America.
I think in some ways Northerners push it because they have to have a righteous cause for what happened. Like to say it was just about preserving a Union would paint Lincoln in a bad light, as you'd essentially have a man willing to kill hundreds of thousands of people so as to maintain a relationship with people that don't want to have a relationship with him.
That's an interesting perspective. It's true that the Union cause was not just about preserving the Union, but also about ending slavery and promoting the idea of a united nation. Lincoln himself recognized the moral issue of slavery and the need to end it, and he believed that preserving the Union was necessary to achieve that goal. The idea of a righteous cause can be important in shaping public perception and support for a conflict, but it's also important to acknowledge the complexities and multiple factors that contributed to the conflict.
It was just about preserving the Union in the beginning, and there were 8 slave states in the Union when shots were fired at Sumter, and there was border states fighting alongside the North. Lincoln himself said he would whatever it would take to preserve the Union, and if he could do that without freeing slaves, he would. In the end, he realized that since he had black people join the Union and fight freeing the slaves was a necessary step in getting the Union to stay alive.
Yes, that's a good point. While preserving the Union was the initial goal of the North, the war ultimately became about slavery as well. The issue of slavery was a major factor in the Southern states' decision to secede from the Union, and Lincoln himself recognized the importance of the issue in the war. As you noted, the Emancipation Proclamation was not issued until 1863, 2 years into the war, and it was done in part to undermine the Confederacy's ability to wage war by taking away its labor force. Ultimately, the Union victory in the Civil War helped to end slavery and establish a more unified United States,